August 2009, my doctor confirmed me 10 weeks pregnant. I see you looking at my stomach. This is rice. I was pregnant then. 2 weeks later, he confirmed that I was HIV positive. Now, for me, this was no great surprise or concern. I knew where I was coming from. Almost 2 decades before, at about the age of 13 or 14, I had been sexually abused by a close family relative. This led me down a path of sexually indiscriminate relationships and intense rage. So I wasn't surprised. My doctor, however, he didn't know how to handle it. When I went into his office, he had his head in his hands and he was looking down at his desk. On his desk was an open file with the words HIV positive written in bold, bright red letters, font size 80. When I sat down in front of him, he began to stammer. The problem is, It's okay, I said, patting his hand. It's okay. I've seen it. Oh, thank God, he said, and he pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his forehead. So that was how I found out I was HIV positive. So it was a problem for him, but not for me. And it was a good thing that it was not so much of a problem, because further down the line, I'd have so many more problems. At 6.5 months pregnant, I'd be fired from my job in a multinational media agency as a TV producer and manager. At 7.5 and 8.5 months pregnant, I'd be kicked out of the places I was living in and become homeless. And, ironically, for the duration of my pregnancy, this same doctor would prescribe exorbitantly priced drugs in the wrong dosage and the wrong measure to me. So you see, all these things conspired to make me lose my sense of self. And today, I want to talk about identity politics in HIV and AIDS. The Nigerian writer Chimamanda Adichie points out how, from an early age, we condition our women to become less in all aspects of their lives. In her words, we teach our girls to shrink themselves, to make themselves smaller. We say to our girls, you should have ambition, but not too much. You should aim to be successful, but not too successful. Otherwise, you will threaten the man. Now, this may sound otherwise, but it is not harmless. Because the girl grows up thinking and realizing that she cannot counter the man in anything. Not in ambition, not in success, not in sex. She takes a huge sexual risk and puts her sexual and reproductive health in the hands of the person she's sleeping with. She thinks that if she's to gain power or any such thing, she must first exchange her body, because she's not taught that there's anything else that she has to offer. This is the route that leads the girl down to the HIV infection. I should know. I was that girl. I became that woman. In May 2010, I finally succumbed to higher wisdom and went to the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, a general hospital, to see specialists about the treatment of my HIV infection. Now, as usual, this place was crowded, filled to the hilt, with people who were waiting in the open air, under the sun, and under the rain if it rained, to see a doctor for hours, waiting for hours to see a doctor who would see them for maybe 3 minutes. Now, because I was referred to her by a doctor friend of hers, the matron allowed me sit in her air-conditioned office. While I sat there, I encountered this woman who had come into the office and was hiding because her husband's uncle had come into the clinic. We began to have a conversation, and she told me she was a widow. Her husband had died a year earlier, and before he had died, he had been seriously ill. Now, it was this uncle who came into the hospital that had been taking him somewhere for treatment. So she never really knew what the problem was. Now, during that time he was ill, they managed to conceive their last child. A child the man did not see because a month before the child was born, he died. Now, after this woman had her child, she fell ill. And, as you can imagine, went for tests and found out that she was HIV positive with a very low CD4. Her immunity was so low that she could have dropped dead any minute. It was then she put 2 and 2 together and realized that her husband had died of AIDS. Now, if this uncle saw her at the clinic, he would go back to the village community and he would tell them that she was responsible for his death, for her husband's death. Even when the matron came into the office and told her that that same uncle was in the hospital for treatment himself, she was not consoled because she knew what the testimony of a man, what havoc it could wreak in her life because she was a woman. Identity politics. This is when people come together, maybe of the same race or gender or religion or something, and form alliances different from broad-based party politics. Now, people want to know, why are you involving identity politics in the issue of HIV and AIDS? Why are you talking about women's rights and equality or gender equality? Or why are you involving that with the sexual habits of Nigerian men? It is because of stories like these widows. Stories like mine, and many more stories I could tell you if we had time. Because isn't identity politics a logical reaction to an identity crisis? A failure of a certain type of people to locate themselves and their worth within a society. People, for instance, young women and girls who are aged 15 to 24 and who make up 64% of the new HIV infections in Nigeria. You see, regardless of the hand that life has dealt us, we must forge, we must find, we must create our identity. Because sometimes creating our identity can give us the vocabulary to define our ultimate freedom. Those are the words of Andrew Solomon. Kintsugi is a Japanese art of repairing broken pottery. What they do is, when pottery is broken, instead of discarding it, they take lacquer and they mix it with gold or silver or platinum dust, and then they mend the broken parts. So the pottery begins to gleam from where it was once damaged. Now, the philosophy behind this is that you should treat damage as a part of the history of an object and not disguise it. In other words, you embrace your imperfections. Now, I particularly like what this signifies metaphorically for those of us who are living with HIV and AIDS. It means that we who have had the audacity to brave this grave diagnosis can have the temerity to rebuild our identity. And this is what the LoLo project, my social venture, wants to do. We want to take the issue of HIV and AIDS and we want to put it on the front burner by giving women who are living with HIV and AIDS skills and placement in the media, in areas that are usually dominated by men. Now, the media is a powerful tool. It shapes perceptions of those who consume it. It elevates our opinions of those who work in it. It instructs, it educates, it entertains, it builds bridges, it connects generations. It made a young, socially introvert, socially awkward young girl, me, turn into a public broadcaster, me. So imagine that tool in the hands of women living with HIV who are camera people, lighting people, stage people, We will reverse the conditioning that tells us all those lies that we cannot be more. We will shape the narratives about our lives and about how society sees us. And most importantly, we will break down the structures that ensure that this disease thrives in the first place. But we're not doing this apologetic and pleading and saying, we're sorry, but we have HIV. We're doing this head held high, saying, hello, we're here, and we're HIV positive.